if the Trump DOJ subpoenaed 20% of the Democrats in the Senate and concluded with no basis in fact that the mere fact that they are Democrats demonstrates that they, Senator Hirono can respond, but you can, I'm happy to recognize you to respond, but I would ask you not to interrupt me because I am not interrupting you. I am certain my Democrat colleagues would be unhappy if the Trump DOJ, I'm asking you not to interrupt me, Senator Hirono. I did not interrupt you. I am speaking now, and I will recognize you to respond when I conclude in speaking. I am confident my Democrat colleagues would be deeply unhappy if the Trump DOJ subpoenaed 20% of the Democrats in the Senate and concluded the mere fact that they're Democrats means they are likely to be criminals. And I do want to note also my prediction that no senator...
A sharp and deeply partisan clash erupted in the Senate as Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Mazie Hirono went head-to-head over one of the most sensitive issues in Washington, whether a special counsel should be allowed to secretly subpoena the records of sitting United States senators. Before we unpack what happened and why it matters, take a moment to subscribe. We break down complex political moments like this so you understand the law, the power dynamics, and the real consequences behind the headlines.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.
I would note that Professor Vladeck just said if a majority of this committee thinks that senators subject to subpoena should be notified that they could pass the law, well, magically, we used a time machine to do that because Congress passed that into law in 2004. It is in the United States Code. It is black-lettered law, and Judge Boasberg disregarded that. Now, he did so at the invitation of Jack Smith, and I would say my Democrat colleague said, well, gosh, it's standard practice not to tell a judge the number you're subpoenaing. It is not standard practice to subpoena 20% of the Republicans in the Senate and the opposing party. And I'm confident my Democrat colleagues would be really pissed if the Trump DOJ subpoenaed 20% of the Democrats in the Senate and concluded with no basis in fact that the mere fact that they are Democrats demonstrates that they, Senator Hirono can respond, but you can, I'm happy to recognize you to respond, but I would ask you not to interrupt me because I am not interrupting you. I am certain my Democrat colleagues would be unhappy if the Trump DOJ, I'm asking you not to interrupt me, Senator Hirono. I did not interrupt you. I am speaking now, and I will recognize you to respond when I conclude in speaking. I am confident my Democrat colleagues would be deeply unhappy if the Trump DOJ subpoenaed 20% of the Democrats in the Senate and concluded the mere fact that they're Democrats means they are likely to be criminals. And I do want to note also, my prediction that no senator would mention Judge Boardman's name proved wrong with the penultimate Democrat speaker. Senator Hirono did mention her name, and 100% of what she said is the decision is on appeal. And I would welcome any of my Democrat colleagues to say that Judge Boardman's decision to deviate downwards by 22 years to reward an assassin, an attempted assassin, the Supreme Court justice is anything but disgraceful, brazen, and encouraging more political assassinations. To defend it is anything other than a complete dereliction and abuse of her oath of office. Senator Hirono, you're welcome to respond.
You know, you talk about using facts. Well, the law that we refer to is not exactly clear on who bears the responsibility for asking who the heck's records are being subpoenaed. And by the way, if you want to blame somebody for the fact that 20% of Republican senators' records were subpoenaed, you can blame President Trump because he's the one who was calling all of you, or he had his minions calling all of you. So there you go. That's all I have to say.
You know, it is an amazing statement that Democrats now believe that the fact that a member of the Senate speaks to the President of the United States is sufficient to subpoena their phone records and presume they are criminals.
Why don't we move on?
Because, Senator, you don't get to say move on because you don't have the gavel, but I will say this. Sad to say, well, perhaps if you hadn't presided over a disastrous economy and an open border and wars across the globe, you might still have the majority, but you don't. And my point is very simple. It is not a criminal conduct to speak with the President of the United States, and it is ludicrous to suggest that it is.
And of course I didn't make that suggestion, so that's why I'm saying, can we move on with this?
And while we're doing that, since Professor Vladeck mentioned a letter from Director Conrad at the Administrative Office of the United States Courts, I'd offer that letter that he mentioned as an additional exhibit.
The letter will be admitted without objection.
The exchange unfolded during a committee hearing focused on subpoena practices used by Special Counsel Jack Smith during investigations tied to former President Donald Trump. At the heart of the dispute was whether senators whose records are subpoenaed must be notified and whether the judiciary ignored existing law when those subpoenas were issued. Senator Ted Cruz opened with a forceful argument. He said the debate should not even be happening because Congress already settled the issue decades ago. Cruz pointed to a federal statute passed in 2004 saying it clearly requires notification when congressional records are subpoenaed. According to Cruz, that law is not ambiguous, it is black-letter law, meaning it is written plainly in the United States Code. Cruz accused Judge James Boasberg of disregarding that statute when approving subpoenas at the request of Special Counsel Jack Smith. Cruz argued that this was not a routine legal matter, but an extraordinary action with enormous constitutional implications. Subscribe here because this is where separation of powers comes into play. Cruz said flatly that Democrats would be furious if a Trump Justice Department had subpoenaed the records of 20% of Democratic senators and implied criminal suspicion simply because of their party affiliation. He framed the subpoenas as politically dangerous, warning that they could criminalize routine communication between elected officials and the president. As Cruz spoke, tensions rose when Senator Hirono attempted to interject. Cruz pushed back, insisting he be allowed to finish his remarks, noting that he had not interrupted her earlier. The chair allowed Cruz to continue. When Cruz concluded, Senator Hirono responded with a very different interpretation of the law. Subscribe now because her response reframed the entire dispute. Hirono argued that the statute Cruz cited is not as clear as he claimed. She said the law does not definitively spell out who bears responsibility for identifying whose records are being subpoenaed or how notification should work in every scenario. In her view, Cruz was overstating the certainty of the legal requirements. She then turned the accusation back on Republicans. Hirono said that if Republican senators' records were subpoenaed, the reason was not their party affiliation, but their direct involvement with former President Trump. She argued that Trump personally or through his allies contacted lawmakers in ways that became relevant to a criminal investigation. In short, Hirono suggested that the subpoenas were about conduct, not party labels. Cruz fired back immediately. He called it astonishing that Democrats would imply that speaking with the President of the United States could justify subpoenaing a senator's phone records. He insisted that communicating with the President is not criminal behavior and warned that treating it as suspicious sets a dangerous precedent. Hirono rejected that characterization, saying she never claimed that talking to the President was itself criminal. She attempted to move the hearing forward, noting that the committee did not have a gavel and could not simply end the debate by force. Subscribe because here's why this matters. At stake is the balance of power between Congress, the executive branch, and the judiciary. If prosecutors can secretly subpoena lawmakers' records without notification, it raises concerns about legislative independence and political surveillance. On the other hand, if lawmakers are shielded too heavily, it raises questions about accountability and whether elected officials can evade legitimate investigations. This clash also reflects the broader national divide over the Trump investigations. To Republicans like Cruz, the subpoenas represent a dangerous overreach and politicization of the justice system. To Democrats like Hirono, they are a lawful response to unprecedented conduct tied to attempts to overturn an election. The law itself is likely to remain contested in court, meaning this fight is far from over. But the hearing offered a rare and revealing look at how fragile trust has become between the branches of government and how quickly legal debates can turn into constitutional showdowns. If you want to stay informed as these battles continue to shape American democracy, make sure you subscribe. We will keep breaking it all down, clearly and without the noise.